Okay, well, we are super excited for another episode of the Rudie Librarian podcast, and so overjoyed today to have with us as a guest the incredible author Jennifer Mathieu. Jennifer, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me and for pronouncing my last name correctly. I didn't even have to mention it.
I've watched a few interviews to make sure that I got it right, but yeah, I'm glad that it ended up being correct too.
It was perfect. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I feel like that brings up, like, it just made me think immediately of one of my. So Jennifer, one of the things aside from being an author is that you're an educator.
Yes.
And as an educator, I think that one of the things that I hate the most about my job is the first day trying to pronounce all my students' names and knowing I'm just gonna butcher some of them.
I know. Yes, I'm right there with you. And I really believe that kids deserve, well, all people deserve to have their names pronounced as correctly as we can do it, And so I know I have a hard time. I feel terrible when I struggle with a particular kid's name. And I really try. And over the years, I'm going into my 20th year. I've learned a lot of like little mnemonic tricks. I have like a lot of little tricks in my mind that I use to help me remember. But yeah, it's a tough one.
I'll have to pick your brain about some of those tips. I feel like when it comes to names, my brain just, like, you can tell me your name and it almost immediately shuts off.
I know. I used to be really good at remembering, like, for years and years and years. When I see a former student, I'll recognize them. I always can recognize that, I taught you, but I don't always get the name anymore. And I say it's because my middle-aged brain has to clear out the room in the memory for another 150 names at the beginning of a new school year. But I always remember faces. I always remember my students. I just don't always remember their names.
For sure. And I would tell my kids at the end of every year, I care deeply for you. I'm rooting for you. I'm cheering for you. If I see you in public, I won't know your name, but I'll recognize you. So just help me out.
Yes, absolutely.
So I love that we immediately can have that connection. It's definitely an educator thing. And if you're not having to pronounce those names, and my very first year when I was student teaching, I student taught for half a year, and then I got hired in the middle of the year as a long-term sub, and then took over as a teacher. And I had this one student who was so sweet, and she had a very challenging name, and her name was Vandana Jivanandam.
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. Yeah.
And I just the Texan in you, I was like, Vandana. And she so I saw her in another classroom, and I asked her, okay, help me, I really want to get your name right, what is it? And she said it's Vandana. And I looked at her and I said, Vandana. And then when I got done, I was like, did I get it? And she's like, yeah. And the teacher next to me said, I called you Vandana all year last year. And she was like, it's okay.
No,
but yeah,
you were a rock star teacher for working so hard to get that name right.
Well, like you said, I do think it's so important, and it's not easy, but it's definitely. And if you're not a teacher, you don't realize how hard it is to come up to pronounce so many names all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk a little bit about how I first discovered your writing. Now, you've published several books, and at least a book before the book that I first read. The first book of yours that I read was Moxie. So prior to Moxie, how many books had you published? When did you start publishing?
So my first book actually came out 10 years ago this summer. It came out in June of 2014. And it was The Truth About Alice. That was my first novel for young adults. Moxie was my fourth. And all told, I have written 7 novels for teenagers. And then, of course, my 8th book for adults is coming out in just a couple of days, The Faculty Lounge. Yeah.
Which I can't wait to talk to you about. One of the things, if you're a teacher, an English teacher, a librarian, you so rarely get to read all the books you want to read because of all the books you need to read.
Yeah.
But when I first found you, it was with Moxie, and Moxie wasn't the sensation, the worldwide sensation that it is now at that point. But we always talk about how you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but we kind of all do.
Of course.
And I loved the cover of Moxie. It just spoke to me. It had a punk rock vibe. And as someone who's always loved punk rock, I was like, I've got to pick up that book.
I loved that cover. Elizabeth Clark is the woman who designed it at Macmillan, the original Moxie cover. And I absolutely fell in love with it right away. And covers don't always come so easily, and the author doesn't always really have say, but they want the author to be happy, of course. But I've had a couple books where I'm like, my agent and I kind of push back. We're not really liking the direction they're taking. But when we saw that cover, we absolutely loved it. And in fact, the designer, Elizabeth Clark, she actually dressed up as the cover for Halloween. She dressed in like a black and white striped top, and she made like a big sign that said Moxie that she wore around her neck. It was really, really, she sent me a picture. It was really cute.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
And I picked up that book and fell so in love with that book. Like I could not put it down. And then John Green has this quote where he talks about like, when you read a good book, you feel like you can't rest until you've shared it with the whole world, because like the world is irreparably broken until they read this book.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like telling everybody about Moxie. And then it wasn't long after that, the news came out that it was being adapted to this Netflix movie, which was also phenomenal. So what an exciting thing. Absolutely
surreal. I absolutely loved writing that book. That book was magical just from start to finish. And God, I had so much fun writing it and making the zines, which I had made zines in my youth. So that's, that was one of the really fun parts of it, was actually getting to pull out my rubber cement and my Sharpies. And I hadn't done that in many years. And Vivian's story, it just came, just so easily. I just absolutely fell in love with all of those characters. And it was just amazing. And then the movie was surreal. To get the phone call that Amy Poehler is interested in my book is just incredible. So, just a really amazing experience as a writer. To take something that I've loved for so long, Riot Grrr, and the world of punk rock, zines, and feminism, all of these things that have mattered to me for so long, and then to be able to, craft a story that has touched so many people, it's just a writer's dream come true.
So tell me, when you started writing that book, what was the spark for that book that you were like, this is where I'm going? Like, I'm sure that there are a million ideas that come and go, but the ones that really hit, what was the spark for this one that you were like, I've got to pursue that?
So I always tell people I love to write about my advice is like, write about your obsessions, or write about your write about something that just is you're curious about. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that personally, but it's something that you're curious about. So for example, my second novel is about a girl who's growing up in Devoted. It's about a girl who's growing up in like a very strict Christian patriarchy, almost cult-like environments. And that wasn't my personal experience, but I'm super fascinated by high demand religions and cults. And, my first book was all about like rumors in a small town. I did not grow up in a small town, but I've always been fascinated by what it must be like to live in one. And so, you write about the things that are fascinating to you, whether you've experienced them personally or not. And I can literally tell you where I was when the idea hit me. I was sitting on the couch in my living room. I had just come back from some conference in Dallas. It was a North Texas teen book. I can't remember what it was, but it was something in Dallas. And I was back on my couch, and I was texting with a friend of mine, a book blogger friend of mine, Kate Soa. And I was trying to think about like, what could I write about next? And I actually was going to see Slater Kinney that week. So I almost think that was like in my mind. And my mind sort of rested on this idea of a young woman. Like, I knew I wanted to write something about Riot Grrr and zines. And initially I thought, okay, I'll write a Riot Grrr YA, but then that would be historical fiction, right?
Yeah.
And I didn't want to write historical fiction. I wanted to write like something set in the present. And I got my mind fixated on this idea of a teenage girl looking through her mother's Riot Grrr zines, because it hit me as I was sitting on the couch that I would be the mother in this scenario, right? And I was texting with my friend Kate, and I was like, what about this? And I could do that. And then she was like, and then there could be an all ages show. And like, we were just going back and forth. And then I said, oh my God, I could make the zine and have the zines like be in the book. And that was really, I like my feet were sitting, I can literally tell you the position that I was sitting in on my couch. And I'm texting with Kate, and it was just the most, I just got so excited. And that's really where the idea hit me. And it was something, of course, that I was fascinated by: Riot Grrr music, feminism, punk rock, zines. And so, for a split second, I thought, I'd write something set in the 90s, but I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to write something in the now. And I saw this image in my mind of a girl flipping through her mom's zines. And that's really how it came to be.
Well, what I love is, I feel like sometimes the universe is like, there's serendipity or kismet or whatever you want to call it, because like right when I read your book, I also read a book called Rebel Girls by Elizabeth Keenan, which is set in like the like early 90s, I believe.
Is it fiction or?
It is fiction, and it deals with a real thing that happened. So it is kind of historical fiction, but more fictionalized than historical in the sense. But it deals with just this turmoil over abortion clinics and like and Christian people picketing them and like that kind of stuff. And the main character is in a Catholic school, but there's rumors going around about her sister, and they fall in love through sort of the love of Riot Grrr. They use that punk rock energy to.
Oh, I know this book. Yes, I have. Yes, I know this book. I think I even read this book when it first came out. Yeah. I know the one you're talking about.
So loved both of those, and I feel like for me, because I graduated in the year 2000. Riot Grrr, I was a little bit young when Riot Grrr was coming out, and I wasn't as aware of it. And so, but I saw that, I read those two books, I saw the documentary, The Punk Singer, and I was just like, man, I got to know more about Bikini Kill and Sleater-Kinney and all these great bands. And so it ignited my passion as someone who loved punk to go back into the Riot Grrr movement. And so it was this gift. So thank you.
Oh, well, I'm just so glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I was a little bit young for Riot Grrr to a certain point. It's funny now I look back because I'm 47. And so I graduated from high school in 1994, and I went to high school just outside of Washington, D.C., which of course was a hub for Riot Grrr. And so Bikini Kill like literally was just 30 minutes away from my house. But this was pre-internet, Yeah. And I went to a very conservative religious high school that, was not my thing really. And I remember reading an article about Riot Grrr in 17 magazine, which was really my only thing that I had, to learn about what's happening in the culture. And I thought it sounded so cool. And, but I didn't know how to get to that. I didn't know anybody that was like involved in that, or, I was in the suburbs. And then when I went to college in Chicago, my freshman year, I ended up becoming friends with a guy named Scott, who was just a really great guy, and we're still friends to this day. And he got me into punk. He made me a mixtape with stuff like Screeching Weasel and No Effects and all this stuff. And I think I really loved it. And I think he was sort of surprised that I liked it. And because I just didn't seem like the type that would, but I just had never heard music like that before. Yeah. And I absolutely fell in love with it. And then an old high school friend of mine who'd gone to a different college, she found Bikini Kill and she sent me a cassette tape. And so that's really, college was when I really started to fall in love with punk and punk music and just that whole world. And then of course, Sleater-Kinney ended up being a huge influence on my life, and they were really big when I was in college.
So have you been loving the sort of resurgence with them recently? With
Bikini Kill? Yeah, I went to see them in Austin when they were here a few years ago. And yeah, I had never gotten a chance to see them live. I had seen Le Tigre in 2000 when they came through Houston. They played at Rice University, and I did get to meet Kathleen Hanna in person. I went up to her and told her, this is long before I had written Moxie, long before I had even become a writer for young adults. And she was so gracious. I told her how much her music had meant to me, and she was super nice. And then, when I saw Bikini Kill in Austin, it was just incredible. It was really wonderful. I have you can't see it, but above my desk here, I have the ticket from that show pinned to my bulletin board. So
that's awesome. Her new autobiography is on my to read list for sure.
It's really good. It's really good. I read it right when it came out, of course. And it's really funny. She's so funny. I mean, that's the thing that a lot of people don't always know, because she's so she's such an activist and she's so inspiring in so many ways, but she's genuinely hilarious. Her childhood was wow. I mean, I knew some stuff from watching the punk singer documentary and just reading about her and looking at some of her old zines, but her childhood was really intense. And so my admiration of her, grew even more when I saw the things that she'd had to sort of overcome.
So for me, a thread that goes obviously from here, and we're going to connect it when we talk about the faculty lounge, is there's a punk thread there, but also the feminism thread that has woven through so many of your books, very present in Moxie. And I'm definitely going to hit the other two books that I'm connected with here, but for me, I loved the feminism thread. I grew up in a household full of women, and I watched those women, unfortunately, not always being treated the way that they should be treated, just by people in their lives, let alone society as a whole. And so I really enjoyed the book. And then as an educator, one of the things I loved was a lot of little things that you address in that book. For instance, dress coding.
Mm-hmm.
I loved your touching on dress coding, because it is a thing that I see so often, where some young ladies who are just built a different way get dress coded for the exact same thing that other people get away with. And it's very arbitrary and sexualized, and it's rough.
Yeah. They're body codes, they're not dress codes. And it really bothers me. I've gotten into it with some of my colleagues where, they want to go on and on about, I feel like teachers, when they, or people in education, when they get really intense about something like dress code, it's because this is my theory, all the bigger, more complex problems in education, of which there are many, seem so insurmountable. So we think we're just going to focus on this one thing. It's like your house is a mess, so you decide to clean out one drawer and really get focused on it. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah.
And so I think that that's where a lot of the dress code obsession comes from. It feels like a way of implementing order when things, when there are probably other more complicated reasons for why things are not working in a school. I absolutely believe there should be parameters. I don't think anyone should be able to come to school with a shirt that has a racial slur on it, or drug paraphernalia, or, something, truly obscene or offensive. But, this obsession over how long is your, are you showing your belly button? Who cares? I just don't get it. I don't get it. Safety is involved. Certain shoes, I think, should not be allowed, because for safety, you need to be able to move quickly. And if you're wearing, slippers or high heels, maybe you can't move quickly. That's a rationale I can get behind. But yeah, I can't get this dress code or anything. And I've been at odds with colleagues who are very fixated on it, but it is what it is. Yeah.
Well, and I feel like, I don't know, maybe you feel this way as a female educator when you're dealing with your males, but as a male educator, it's very uncomfortable to try and enforce dress code. And so 9 times out of 10, when I was required to deal with dress code, I was just, hey, female teacher next door. Help me out here.
Oh, I think it's really, really, it's uncomfortable, I think, for any adult, but I have had many male colleagues say the same thing. They don't, because then they feel like a creeper, right? They've been, and no, I totally get that. And, it's one of the many things that I focused on in Moxie. And feminism is just something that's very important to me. And I think I was a feminist my whole life, but I didn't really have a term for that. If you've read the dedication of Moxie, you know that I dedicated Moxie in part to a high school teacher that I had, who referred to me as a feminazi, because I had the crazy notion that women should be allowed to go to the Citadel. When my senior year in high school, there was a big story in the national press where a woman named Shannon Faulkner was trying to become the first woman at the military school, the Citadel in South Carolina. And I was in this current topics class, and we were debating it. And I said, if she can do it, why shouldn't she be allowed? And he just stopped calling me by name. And he just referred to me as feminazi. I later learned many, many, many years later that I wasn't the only young woman that he did that to. And I wish now that we had known each other and we could have banded together and maybe tried to do something about it, because it was so disgusting. But, so I knew I was I knew I believed deeply in women's rights, but I didn't have the term feminism until I went to college. And, it's a word that's so loaded for so many people and it sounds so scary. And all it is to me is liberation. That's all
Yeah.
feminism is liberation. And it's liberation for men as well. Men are just as constrained by these, ridiculous rules. I mean, yeah, men have benefited from the patriarchy, sure, of course, but men are also told like it's not okay to cry. It's not. I mean, we have a
Yeah.
crisis in this country of, and I'm the mother of a teenage boy, so I'm very, aware of it, and the pressure that that he's under to affect a certain way or be a certain way, or you're not a real man. Even in 2024, you see that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, my name rhymes with crying, so
Oh, no.
I was for sure like trying not to do it in public because it was just going to be a thing. But like it was high school when I met the first male role model who made me feel like I didn't have to fit all the stereotypes of
Mhm.
masculinity and I
Yeah,
could be okay.
yeah.
And which was great because I didn't fit any of them, you know?
Right,
And
right.
so, yeah, I really felt like an outcast because I had a lot of emotions and because
Mhm.
I was much more even now, my wife, whom I love, who I've been married to for 22 years, like she loves to go to like Home Depot and look at power tools.
Mhm.
I've got zero interest in that. I'm much more like, let's go take in some art somewhere,
Yeah, that's
you know?
hilarious.
And it
Love
was my
it.
high school choir director that made me feel like that was okay. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, I
that's
agree.
awesome. Oh, I love that, I love that. Yeah, I think I'm a pretty emotional person, but I think my husband cries more regularly than I do. So, it's good to be in a partnership where, you are with a person who supports you for who you are and just how you are. And
Absolutely.
it breaks my heart that there's so many young people, especially young men, that just don't feel like, that they can do that. At least once a year in my classroom, I will say, guys, it's okay for you to cry. Like I want them to hear it from someone, at
Yeah,
least once in their lives.
absolutely. So I could talk about Moxie forever, and we haven't even really talked about the movie, which is so good. And I want to encourage everyone, go watch the movie. Brilliantly acted, brilliantly directed, phenomenal soundtrack. The Linda
So
Lindas
great.
playing
So
Rebel Girl
great.
in the
Yeah.
sound, in the movie. So good. But the next book of yours that really I got to spend time with, I've got to say, I hope to go back and read every book. It's
Oh,
on my
thank
list.
you.
But
Thanks.
the next book of yours I got to spend time with was while I was a high school teacher. So I was a junior high teacher for 5 years,
Mhm.
and then I became a high school teacher for 6 years. And while I was a high school teacher, I we had a Battle of the Books team that the librarian and I co-sponsored. And one of our books one year was Bad Girls Never Say Die.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I was so excited to read it. I had seen a little bit of an interview with you, and I had heard you talking about how much you had loved The Outsiders and how
Mhm.
you had always wondered, like, what happened to the Greaser Girls,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so you sort of flipped that. As a junior high teacher, The Outsiders was the book my kids would never stop talking about.
Oh,
They
me
loved
too.
it so much.
I taught middle school, and I taught The Outsiders for many years when I taught middle school, and yeah, same thing. It's universally loved.
So was that your spark on this one? You were just like, I'm gonna figure out what happened to the Greaser Girls?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, The Outsiders it was one of my favorite books when I was young myself. And then when I became a teacher, my very first year in the classroom, I started teaching seventh grade. Now I teach high school, but I started teaching middle school. And my very first year in the classroom, they told me, okay, well, you're teaching seventh grade, and one of the books you're going to teach is The Outsiders. And I was like, yay! I mean, I was so excited. And actually, truth be told, I was a very young teacher, I was in my 20s still. And one of the things that I did with my students was that I had them I gave them like a culminating project, and they could do a variety of they had a choice of what they could do for a project for the book. But one of the options was fan fiction, essentially. I didn't really know it was called fan fiction. I didn't know what fan fiction was at that point.
Yeah.
This is like 20 years ago. And so I encouraged them if they wanted to write from another character's point of view, or if they wanted to write like a deleted scene. And I actually wrote, this is before, and you can find it online. I'm not going to tell you where, but it exists on the internet. I wrote 2 or 3 pieces of fan fiction from the point of view of of greaser girls, of girls who are just like, they're not even characters on the page in the book. They're names. They're literally just names. I wrote like I just had so much fun, and I had never written fiction before, really. And so that was my first foray, and just it's on fanfiction.net somewhere. But I, always had that idea in my mind. So that was for sure the spark. But let me tell you, that was one of the hardest books I've ever written. Bad Girls Never Say Die. I thought it was going to be easy. I thought it was going to be just like an easy little book that I would just fly off my fingers. And actually writing historical fiction for a time period that I had never experienced was very difficult. I have written another book that's set in the past, The Liars of Mariposa Island, which is set in the mid 80s, but I knew the mid 80s. So that wasn't difficult, right? But I was not alive in the 60s, and I did so much research. But, my respect for people that have written historical fiction just like grew tenfold, because, I'd be typing and I would be describing the characters sitting at the cafeteria, and I'd be like, well, how did teenagers in the 60s take their lunch to school? And then I'd be Googling, when were thermoses invented? Like,
Yeah.
And then I had emails, I had interviewed all of these amazing people, senior citizens from Houston, like folks in their 70s and 80s that could, I had taken them out to lunch. I had interviewed all these seniors, and they were amazing. And so then I would email them out like, what did you have for lunch? So it was very laborious. And it was a really difficult book to write in that respect. Although I'm very happy with, I'm very proud of how it turned out. And it was a lot of fun in a lot of ways too, but it was a lot harder to write than I thought it would be.
So in the process of writing a book like that, are any of those things the kind of things that your editor would catch and be like, oh, I don't know if this is factually or historically accurate? Do you get that kind of feedback?
Yeah, typically, I mean, sometimes the editor will catch certain things, but you don't get into the weeds of like fact checking stuff until you're in the copy editing phase. So, you work with your editor and it goes through numerous passes, and, then ultimately it'll go into copy edits, which is like a writer's greatest feeling, because then the book is essentially done. But then the copy editor will come back and have, and they'll do research sometimes, and they'll be like, well, was this show on in 1964 in Houston? Because from what I can see, it was only on here, or, and they'll catch some things like that. And I'm very grateful for a good copy editor. So there were some little catches there, but because I had researched so hard and I was so, kind of neurotic about getting the facts right, there weren't too many mistakes. I hope there weren't anyway.
I definitely want to come back to the content, but I want to kind of follow this strand for a second about editing the book. How many times would you say you go over your writing before you submit it?
Well, if I'm working, if I'm working on something brand new, oh gosh, 15, 20 times maybe before I'll share it with my agent.
Okay.
And then if, my agent and I will work on it, and then we'll try to sell it, which is what happened with the Faculty Lounge. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, because there might be sections that I'll look at, a paragraph that I'll look at 40, 50 times. And then there'll be another section that I'll only read over a couple of times. So it just sort of depends, I think.
So I love having this conversation, and I try to have this often with authors, because as an English teacher, I know how much our kids hate editing and hate going back over their writing. But one of the things I try to always encourage them with is that, like, it is a part of the process. It is sometimes a painful part of the process, but it is a necessary part of the process. Yeah. And I would share my story. I'm not a published author, but I did have to write like a very long thesis for the honors program in my bachelor's program, the longest paper I've ever written. And I remember when I submitted my last section to my thesis advisor, and I was like, I'm done. Yeah. And I went out to eat and went to the movies with my wife. And when we came out of the movie, I had an email from from that professor saying, just a few more edits. And I was like, I literally cried. I was like, you got to be kidding me.
You got to be kidding. I know. I always tell my students, when they're complaining about revising and editing, whatever, I'm like, don't talk to me, because the most edited words in the world are the ones you find in books on shelves. And I think a lot of kids actually think that, like, oh, a professional writer just writes a perfect draft, but of course there is no such thing as a perfect draft and a perfect first draft. And so, I think it just, I truly do tend to keep my writer life fairly separate from my teacher life, only because, I don't know, I guess I don't ever want to feel like I'm selling myself to my students. I do tell them and they are aware and they know. I actually teach under my married name, so I have like a different last name to my students, so they don't always put it together right away or anything. And I kind of like that. I do like that, but I will occasionally mention, some things from my writing life, and they will, they're curious, but ultimately I'm really their English teacher, more than anything else.
Yeah. Well, I imagine that well, what would I say about this? Does it get passed down? Like, are there a lot of people that come in knowing, or is it typically more like they get it halfway through the year before they realize? Or
so they typically a lot of them will come in knowing. I actually am starting in a new school this fall. So I don't know how that'll go. But at my old school where I taught for 8 years, a lot of the kids came in knowing, either from older siblings or because I was working there when Moxie became a movie, and that was kind of a big deal. I do tell my students on the first day, because I always start the year off by writing them a letter about myself. And then I ask them to write a letter to me telling them about me. And so I do tell them on the first day of school, like, oh, in my free time, I'm a writer, and, I've written these books. And if you ever want to talk about creative writing, I'd love to talk with you about it. And so kids will, in their letters back to me, sometimes I'll be like, oh, I didn't know, or I saw Moxie and I didn't know, that was you, or they'll be like, oh yeah, my mom told me that you were a writer, so it's kind of a mixed reaction, but it's always sweet. The ones that have read the books too, they're just so sweet about it. They, are excited. And sometimes, like, my publisher will send me, author copies and stuff. And I don't need 20 copies of Bad Girls Never Say Die, or, so I'll take them to school and I'll be like, anybody want a book? And then I'll sign it to them. And it's kind of fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I can say that our students loved Bad Girls Never Say Die. And it was very gripping, like pretty quick in the book. You're thrust into this, like, turmoil, this event that occurs that is changes the lives of the characters. And then you have this wonderful story of people who are so different, who develop a friendship under those circumstances because they protect one another, they help one another.
Yeah. Well, and that was something that was so, like, magical about the original story, was Ponyboy's understanding that in the end, it's things are rough all over, as the famous line says in the book. And that was what I wanted to sort of get across in Bad Girls too, is that, it really isn't necessarily like how much money you have or who your parents are, but, all young women struggle with the same, pressures and the same societal expectations and, stereotypes. And especially in the 1960s, for sure, girls were up against a lot. Sometimes I think we're moving backwards, and I think, God, there's so much that girls are going through now too. But, that was for sure something I was trying to get across. I hope I did by the end of the novel, that, there's more that connects us than separates us a lot of the time.
Man, what a poignant and necessary message for our society, even,
I know, right?
like at this exact moment.
I know. Gosh, yeah.
Well, again, I could spend a lot of time talking about this book as well, but I want to dive into your upcoming book, which I'm so excited about. The Faculty Lounge, your first adult novel. And I've got to tell you, I when I read the description of this book, I was like, first of all, I was looking you up because I was trying to find what other books by you I had not yet read. And then I saw this book on the way. I'm going to back up a second here. I now am an elementary school librarian.
Great.
And the first thing I did when I became an elementary school librarian is I started a faculty book club.
Oh, I love it.
My purpose for that was I wanted to create an environment where we were not just coworkers, but friends, and make that easier for me as the new guy. But I also wanted to create an environment where we as a faculty celebrated and loved reading, and to try and encourage us to create an environment on campus where it was obvious that we loved to read, in hopes that my students would do the same.
That's awesome.
So I saw this book, and I want to read sort of the description here of this book, because there could not have been a more perfect book for my faculty book club
Yay!
in Texas. So this is our first book for this upcoming year.
Oh, great. Oh, I'm so honored.
So it says, by the acclaimed author of Moxie, a funny, big-hearted adult debut that is at once an ode to educators, a timely glimpse at today's pressing school issues, and a tender character study following a sprawling cast of teachers, administrators, and staff at a Texas high school. With its ensemble of warm and unforgettable characters, the Faculty Lounge shows readers a different side of school life. It all starts when an elderly substitute teacher at Baldwin High School is found dead in the Faculty Lounge. After a bit of a stir, life quickly returns to normal. It's not like the worst or even most interesting thing that's happened within the building's walls. But when a week later, the spontaneous scattering of his ashes on the school grounds catches the attention of some busybody parents, it sets in motion a year that can only be described as wild, bizarre, tragic, mundane, beautiful, and humorous all at once. In the midst of the ensuing hysteria and threats of disciplinary action, the novel peeks into the lives of the implicated adults who, it turns out, actually have first names and continue to exist when the school day is done. We, a former punk band frontman, there's a typo in
Okay.
where what I'm reading here, which is from Goodreads. But a former, I believe it's the principal, right? Who's a former
principal.
punk band frontman, now a middle-aged principal who must battle it out with the school board to keep his job. A no-nonsense school nurse willing to break the rules despite the close watch on their campus. When a student arrives at her office with a dilemma. And a disgruntled English instructor who finds himself embroiled in even more controversy when he misfires a snarky email. Oh, and there's also a teacher makeout session in a supply closet during a lockdown. As these people continue to manage the messiness of this school year, there is the looming threat of what will become of their beloved Baldwin High. Ultimately, at the heart of this unconventional workplace novel is a story of the power of human connection and of the joy of finding purpose in what it is we do every day. Yay.
I feel kind of like I'm laughing at my own characters, but like that's so pompous of me, but I genuinely I love my characters so much in this book. So I'm just remembering the joy it was to get to know them and write them.
Well, I don't know them yet, but I can tell you there's so much of this that appeals to me. I like when it starts off and says that you have an elderly substitute who is found dead in the faculty lounge, and everyone just kind of moves on. And I'm like, that's
what would happen at a school.
Yeah. It's like, I mean, I've been there when beloved teachers have passed away, not on campus, but have passed away. And you have this day of deep grieving. And then literally my first 4 days of teaching ever, when I got brought on as a full-time sub, I was taking the place of a teacher who had long-term cancer, and they had subs in and out. And my first day was, hey guys, you guys have been through a bunch of substitutes and it's been really rough for you. I'm going to be your substitute until she comes back, and we hope it's soon. And she died that night.
Oh my gosh.
And so the second day, and she was such a wonderful teacher and coach. The second day was, guys, I'm so sorry that your teacher and coach has passed away. And it was such deep grief in these 7th grade classrooms, but all over campus because she was a coach.
Yeah.
And then we had a weekend, and then my 3rd and 4th days, Monday and Tuesday the next week, were 4-hour EO STAR
tax
DBA tests.
Yeah,
it was the first year of STAR.
Yeah.
4-hour STAR test. So it was
God forbid we miss that.
Move on.
Yep.
And you're expected to perform well,
Yeah.
So that is the way that it works. We just move on.
Well, and I think that's my hope with this book, as I've said, is it's my love letter to every adult that works in a school. And it does have teachers in it, but it also has, there's the school nurse, there's a custodian in it, some administrators. I confess, I do not have a character, a librarian as a major character. There is a reference to a librarian, and you will see, there's a little bit of commentary there because of the lack of funding for librarians, that there's a mention of the librarian having to be the librarian for like 3 schools at once. And so I do mention the beloved librarian, but they're not on the page. But there's a variety of different characters in there, and it's my love letter to every adult that has ever, worked in a school, the clerks, the paraprofessionals, the cafeteria workers. And I think that in the culture, there's, when you think about movies that have been made about teachers and administrators, like Stand and Deliver and Lean on Me and Dangerous Minds, and it positions adults in schools as these sort of saints or martyrs. They have no lives of their own. They give everything to their students, and they just, they're like these, just angel creatures, right? Or now in the zeitgeist, they're indoctrinators, or they're groomers, or they're pushing terrible books. That's happening in the culture. So you're seeing this ridiculous binary. And the truth is that most adults who choose to work in schools are doing so because they genuinely want to help kids learn. That's it. They feel called to do this work, and they're fully formed human beings with flaws, with challenges, with hopes, dreams, families of their own, lives of their own. And so that's what I'm trying to do with this book, is just humanize a profession that has often been, painted in these extreme ways that aren't real, not real to me, not real for when I think about the people that I've been fortunate enough to work with.
Absolutely. And, a couple things about that. Like, one, you talked about the comment about teachers being groomers. Every time that comes up, I've had so many teachers comment the same thing. I've said the same thing. If I could groom your kids, it would be to get them to write their name on their paper and turn in their homework on time.
100%. That is the best comeback that I've heard to that argument. Like, if I can indoctrinate your child, I would indoctrinate them to do their homework, to read, to, not pull their phones out in class. Like, that's what I would be focusing on. Right. Yeah. One of my favorite quotes, and I actually sign off on my work emails this way, is a quote from Margaret Mead, which is that children must be taught how to think, not what to think. And I firmly believe that. And, I teach AP language now, which is a course centered on rhetoric. And I'm always telling my students, like, ultimately, we're analyzing how arguments work in here. Your feelings are valid, whatever your positions are. And that's not my job to come to school and indoctrinate children with my belief system. That's ridiculous. I've come there to teach them to be critical thinkers and to be able to think for themselves. And I love my kids. I love my students. And I know most teachers I know, that's why they're doing this job. Because a lot of teachers and educators and librarians and people that work in schools, they could make more money doing other things. You and I both have skill sets that could translate to other industries, and we'd probably make more money. But we're called to this work. And so, it's my attempt to humanize, but also make people laugh. It's a very character-driven story. I hope it's full of heart. It gets kicked off when this beloved substitute, Mr. Lair, he used to teach at the school. He passes away of natural causes in the lounge. And he had taught at Baldwin for many, many years before he retired and then returned as a sub. And he had asked that his ashes be spread in the courtyard of the school. And the school agrees to do it, but something happens, which I won't reveal here, but it leads to sort of disastrous results. And then we kind of follow this cast of characters over the course of this crazy year, dealing with the fallout of this ashes incident. And each chapter focuses on a different character. But the storyline is going all the way through. So.
Well, that sounds fantastic. First of all, the fact that the substitute is a retired teacher, because so many of our substitutes are teachers who worked in our district, in our schools, loved their jobs, and then they're like, all right, I'm done, I'm gonna retire. And then like 6 months later, they're back substituting because they just couldn't let it go. They just loved it.
Right.
And they know
they loved it.
We have the need. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. I just had so much fun writing it. The characters were so real to me. And I do think that the book will resonate with anyone who likes a good character-driven story that'll make you cry and laugh. Like, I don't think, I mean, most of us went to school, right? We wondered what happened in the faculty lounge, right? So I don't think it's a book just for educators, but if you are an educator, especially if you've worked within a public system, there are a lot of Easter eggs in there that I have put in there for you that, you know, I've already had some teachers just write to me like, oh my God, you nailed this. Like certain moments in like a district training or EOC exams or all of that, where, I mean, that stuff wrote itself. It was so easy because I've lived it, you know? I'm really looking forward to hearing from folks that have really been in the trenches, you know, when they, I hope, feel validated by a lot of the absurdities that I highlight in the book, because we certainly have to go through many.
I feel like what would be maybe one of the harder things about writing this book, because of your experience, would be to keep the truth, like keep real stories out. Like, you know, you're thinking about these people in these situations, and it would be so much easier to just like literally write these absurd stories of things that have happened. How hard was that to be more fictional when it's...
Well, I did have colleagues that are like, what's going on in this book? You know, like, is this some kind of tell-all? No, it is a work of fiction. But, you know, the characters are fully fictional. I mean, they're, you know, I will confess the spark for this one came from an elderly substitute at my high school that would take naps in the lounge. And he had been a teacher. He had not been a teacher on my campus, but he had taught before. And he would take naps. And I remember being worried, like, is he going to wake up? Because he was well into his 80s. And he always did. He's fine. But
thank goodness.
But that was the spark. So there is some, obviously, you know, there's moments like this one scene that I wrote where the teachers are sitting there and they're being guided through a training by a woman from central office who taught for like 5 minutes and now is getting paid way more money to run a training. I mean, have I lived through that? Yeah. You know, so there's stuff that's very much grounded in things I've experienced, but the characters themselves are truly fictional. You know, the people that I've come up with in my mind, but a lot of the like rhythm of school life is based on my own experiences.
So one other thing, like we here at the Rudie Librarian, and I don't know why I'm using like the royal we, it's me, but me here at the Rudie Librarian, we focus on books and then music and fandom. And primarily in the music realm, we've talked mostly about punk, ska, and emo music. There is a local ska band from Arlington here called Flip and the Combined Effort. And Flip is the lead singer, and he is an elementary music teacher. Aww. And he did a whole EP that was about being a teacher. And there's a song on there called This Could Have Been an Email.
Yes.
And I feel those vibes, you know, when you're sitting in those PDs and you've got, you know, you're like, really? Or like, hey, let's do an activity to get to know one another. And you're like, we've worked together for 25 years.
We don't need to do an icebreaker. We don't need chart paper and marker caddies. Yeah, no, it's all mentioned in my book. Yeah. You know, there's sort of a deleted scene from my book where there's one character in the faculty lounge named Mr. Fitzsimmons, who's taught for 1,000,000 years. And he's a curmudgeon, and he, you know, the legend is that he refused to have the school replace his old chalkboard with a whiteboard when they were bringing out whiteboards, because he just loved his chalk. So he's the only teacher in the school that's still allowed to have a chalkboard, but he has to supply his own chalk and he has to keep it clean himself, which he does. And so he's this old curmudgeon, and he's just constantly complaining about everything because he's worked there forever, and he's basically untouchable. And he's a good teacher too. You know, he gets results, but I had this one little inner chapter that did not make it into the final cuts, the final draft, where it's an email from Mr. Fitzsimmons to the principal, where it is a list of all of the directives that they have been given over the course of the year, you know, like monitor this spreadsheet and put these in tier 1, tier 2. And and it's super long, and it's just absurd, right? And that was based on, you know, things I've really experienced, you know, like Telpass and all these other things. I changed up the names a little bit. Sure. And so, you know, he puts this whole email together like, isn't this ridiculous? Right. And my editor was like, this is a little too inside baseball, right? Like this is a little too
Yeah.
like insular to the teacher world, and it might slow down the reader that doesn't have that experience. But it was pretty cathartic to just write that all, to put that all on paper.
I believe it.
It helped me like feel Mr. Fitzsimmons' anger as I was writing his character.
So we have the punk rock come back because you have this punk rock principal.
Yeah.
So tell me, was that again just the punk in your heart that had to find its way out?
Yeah. I mean, you know what? I have an idea for another adult novel in my mind, and there's a punk element to that too. It keeps coming back. So yeah, one of my favorite chapters, it might've been my favorite chapter to write, is about the principal, Mr. Kendricks, who, I make his character a little bit older than me. So he discovered punk, like, you know, when Reagan was president, and, you know, when it was like the local scenes were just really starting to build, and this, you know, backlash to 70s arena rock and stuff. It was like punk was sort of in its infancy, and he was just lived, breathed, died punk music. He lived in a group home. He was in a band. He, you know, like, he just refused to take part in anything mainstream. Like, he was hardcore about his punk ethics, politics, you know, read Maximum Rock and Roll, like everything. And, you know, when we encounter him, he's a high school principal, right? In his 50s.
He is the man.
He is the man. And so it's like, how did he go from being everything that, you know, hating the man to becoming the man? And the tensions explored there. And a kind of a crisis in his marriage, really, which allows, you know, really that's sort of where it all kind of comes together. And I absolutely love writing that chapter. It was the most fun that I, you know, had, I think, writing the book. And his character is very dear to me.
I love that. And I feel like, you know, so much of punk rock is like anti-establishment and like, you know, against the authority or whatever. And then so many of us end up being in some sort of position at some point later where we are the authority, where we are the one laying down the law.
Yeah.
And there is this inner turmoil, this inner conflict where you're like I struggled. So one of the things I always struggled with classroom management, I mean, I had good classroom management. It was not bad at all, but I struggled oftentimes with, I'm like, other teachers would be like, man, you know, I wrote this kid up because they talked for 5 seconds. And I'm like, I mean, who cares? Like,
I know. Yeah.
You know, like I was that kid that talked all the time in class. And like, do I really want to write a kid up? I remember being so annoyed at my teachers when I was like, I'm getting the work done. Why does it matter?
Right. Yeah, no, I know. And I'm the teacher that, you know, if I hear like the kids are going to stage a walkout, or they're going to, you know, they're going to do something rebellious, you know, part of me is like, good, you know, I kind of like it when a kid asserts themselves, you know? Yeah. And so, yeah, you know, I think that's another, you know, a lot of people have asked me like, well, why are you writing for adults now? Like, why are you never going to write for young adults anymore? And I would never say never. I think it's very possible that I might one day, but you know, when I first started writing YA, and it took a long time for my first book to come out. So I started writing YA. I was in my late 30s when The Truth About Alice was published, but I had started trying to write YA when I was like 30, 31. And my own adolescence was really not that long before, you know, it was not that far in the rearview mirror. And now, you know, I'm 47 and I am thinking about things like that, like the tension that you feel as someone in middle age who is like, what are my values? And like, have I sold out, or have I, you know, like that kind of stuff is more, I think I'm thinking about that stuff more. And I think I'm just feeling more called to exploring things, you know, that adults are going through too. And so, you know, like when I wrote Bad Girls Never Say Die, you know, I kept thinking about Evie's mom and how she ended up in this position. And like, you know, I started to feel more kind of curious about the adults in the books. And that was a sign to me like, hey, maybe it's time to, you know, to write about the grownups for a while.
Yeah. Well, I love it. And there are so many different characters, you know, just the fact that you mentioned in there, like Shock, your teachers have first names and they have lives, you know. It reminds me of that scene in Mean Girls where they're like, I love seeing teachers in real life. It's like seeing, you know, an animal at the zoo.
Yeah, I know. And whenever I run into my students in real life, they all, even the most like, and I've taught upperclassmen, like these very composed, 17, 18-year-olds, and they see you and they look at you like they don't know how to react, and I always go, isn't it weird to see me in real life? Like I always try to cut the tension, and they're like, they just, it's so funny, because they just don't always realize that we do have lives, that we don't sleep at the school. Although sometimes it feels like we do because we're there so much, but yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I definitely have felt a sense of like feeling like I had to not be a human, like there's this pressure as educators, especially in the context of like the politicizing of educators and education and all that, where you're like, I love my district. I work in a great district, but one of the things that they would tell us really early on is basically like, they really encouraged us, don't have social media at all.
Yeah.
And if you have social media, don't post these kinds of things, these kind of pictures. No one can follow you.
Yeah.
Whatever. And oftentimes it felt awkward. Like, for instance, this thing that I've created, the Rudie Librarian, because it's an organization, a business or whatever. It's none of those things. It's a podcast, but it was automatically public, so anybody could follow it. And I felt like I have to be real careful about what I say and do on here. And I've gotten a little bit more comfortable with that, but I definitely feel like, you worry about that. Like, how much of myself can I show? How much can I be human?
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I've thought about that with my writing career. I mean, my books, Moxie's about young feminists. I mean, if some people don't like that, and then I'm teaching their children, like, what is that? I'm very fortunate that at least up until this point, and I hope I never do, I've never had any issues. I think when parents meet me and then when their kids have me and they realize that I am living by Margaret Mead's line of children need to learn how to think, not what to think. Some students that I've connected with, some of my favorite students, it sounds like, but some of the students that I've really loved, that have connected with, have had more conservative values maybe, or conservative politics than I personally do, but they are really thoughtful in the way they articulate their beliefs, and they try to make an argument using the tools that we've talked about in a class that focuses on rhetoric. And I have loved engaging with those kids, and I, make them feel, I hope, respected and valued and part of our school community, our classroom community. And I think when parents realize that I'm that kind of teacher, then they don't worry. And I've been very fortunate that I've never had anybody, give me any heat for anything, that I've said or done or written. Hopefully it'll stay that way.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I want to ask one more question about this book, and then I always ask a couple questions here at the end that are not necessarily directly from the book. But so you were teaching in Houston ISD, correct?
Yes.
So people in Texas are aware, and maybe people in the world are aware, I don't know, but in Texas we're aware that Houston ISD has had a very tumultuous last few years.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about politicizing education, it doesn't get much more political than what's been done with Houston, where our state has literally taken over the school district. And then we've seen like these controversies where the person who's running the school district is maybe also funneling money to his private schools that he runs in Colorado.
Yeah.
So how much of the turmoil of that and I really wonder, especially because I know you probably were writing this book, years ago or whatever.
Yeah.
How much did this play a role in the writing of this book?
So, because publishing moves very slowly, the book is coming out now, but I wrote it before the takeover and all of that. So some people are like, oh, did you write this because of what happened in Houston ISD? And I'm like, no, the book was already written. And given the past year that I just went through in HISD, I've had colleagues say, you have to write a sequel, because there's some satirical elements in the faculty lounge where I'm gently poking fun at things like central office and stuff. The year that I went through just recently, I think, is almost beyond satire. Yeah. So yeah, it's been very, very, very depressing. Houston ISD had a B rating. We were a AAA bond rating, but because of a law that was passed in the Texas legislature, the state was allowed to take us over. And we were in a move that many people feel is political. And we were taken over, and this gentleman named Mike Miles, who rules like I don't work for the district anymore, so I can speak openly about this. Truly one of the worst, leaders that I've ever worked for. Rules with intimidation, rules with fear. As a teacher, I know that learning and growth cannot happen in a climate or a culture of fear. If a child does not trust me, if they don't feel like they're part of a community, learning cannot happen. And so the culture that was created in this district under his leadership was so toxic that more than half the English department at my high school, including me, decided to leave. So
which is really so sad.
It's really heartbreaking. It's really, really heartbreaking. And, I do think that the city of Houston is waking up and is aware and is fighting back as much as they can. I think that this is part of a larger plan to privatize education, which, Houston just lived through Hurricane Beryl, and we've seen what privatizing the electrical grid can do. I don't know that that's always, I've worked in a private school, and I'm not opposed to private education. I think that it's a right that people have to send their own children to private school. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. But I believe that we need a well-funded public system that's good for democracy, that it's good for communities, that public education is an important part of our American democracy and just our culture. And it really pains me that people now are saying things like government runs schools or all this nonsense. It's so politicized now. And all it is we just, and this is something that Republicans and Democrats in Texas agree. There's a lot of people on both sides of the aisle that do not think that public education should be privatized. And so it's just really depressing and really sad to me because it's not about kids, And
I mean, we could, and we won't, but we could sit here and have a long discussion about, the idea right now with the voucher system and that leading really to privatization of public schools and of schools in Texas. There are some real concerns that we have as educators with what that would do, again, I won't dive into that because it would be a whole nother can of worms. But I will say that for me as an outsider, as someone who was just coming into becoming a school librarian, it was kind of terrifying to watch all the libraries basically be shut down and and
and it's something, I touch on it in the faculty lounge, like kind of briefly towards the end. Like if you're reading carefully, like there are a lot of little indicators that the schools are not as funded in Texas as they once were. And there is a flashback at one point to Baldwin High School, the high school in the story, in the 60s, where, the space race was going on and there was a lot of anxiety about American children falling behind. And we were funding our public schools because we wanted our American school children to be the best in the country, in the world, and there's this flashback to the 1960s where you see how the library is fully funded and how all this. And so, I don't want to be too kind of like morality play about it, but I think the careful reader will see that, I am subtly, I think, commenting on what happens to a school over the course. I comment on the infrastructure, I comment on, all the schools physically falling apart, all of this. When we don't take care of our public schools. And when we don't take care of our public schools, we're not taking care of our democracy. And that's really scary to me.
Yeah. Well, for people who aren't from Texas, I want to also highlight that it's very difficult for you to grasp how large Houston is if you're not from Houston.
Huge.
Houston is the fourth most populated city in the United States of America. It is geographically massive. I've only driven through it once.
Took 10 days to drive.
I was with a friend from College Station, and he was attending an Orthodox church in Houston, and we drove from College Station to his Orthodox church. And I remember seeing the sign that we'd entered Houston, and then we just kept driving and driving. And I was like, "How far is your church?" He's like, "Dude, Houston's huge."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when you're talking about this kind of, takeover and this kind of situation, you're talking about so many people that were affected, so much going on. And I also want to say, not related to that at all, but I neglected to ask early on, with Hurricane Beryl coming through, everything okay with you there? I know I had a lot of friends who lost power. Were you out of power?
We were out of power for a week, and fortunately, for part of that time, we were actually out of town on a planned trip, so we were able to avoid some of the outage time because of that. But yeah, Houston's been through it, and a lot of my books are set in Houston because I love living here. I'm not a native. I moved here when I was in my very early 20s. And I married a Houstonian, and that's why I'm still here. That's not the only reason. I've fallen in love with this city. It means so much to me. It has loved me so much. The people are incredible. The diversity is wonderful. And so, a lot of my writing is, also a love letter to Houston and to Texas. And we've been through some really tough times as a city and as a state. There's just a lot going on. And, my hope is that, we'll find a way to work together. I think that there are more sensible people in this state than not. And, I think that we have all kinds of different thoughts and ways of, but can we treat each other like people? Can we care about each other? Can we agree on our shared humanity? Can we find ways to, compromise and connect? I know we can. And so that's my hope. And I'm not giving up on us yet.
Absolutely. Getting back to that message from Bad Girls Never Say Die, of just remembering that the person that looks so different and seems so different is not so different.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Love that. So one of the things I always ask at the end of my episode of the podcast is I always like to bring it back to, obviously we've been talking about books the whole time, which has been great, but I always like to bring it back to books. And I always like to ask my guest, is there a book that you're currently reading that you would love to tell us about a little bit? Or do you have a favorite book that you want to, cheer on for a minute, or a book that maybe you want other people to pick up?
So a book that I'm reading right now that I'm really enjoying is The Nix by Nathan Hill. He also wrote a book called Wellness that I also read. And both his books are sort of, I think, like love letters to Chicago, where I actually went to school. So I guess like some of the references. And it's almost too complicated to explain. Like the mind of this writer, how he's jumping around from the 1960s to 2011. There's multiple characters. He's going one part of the book is written like a choose your own adventure. I mean, it's really incredible. Like he is just a fascinating writer, Nathan Hill. And so I'm really enjoying that right now. One of my favorite writers of all time is Meg Wolitzer. And I think probably one of my favorite books of all time is The Interestings by Meg Wolitzer. It's about a bunch of teenagers who meet at a camp for gifted artistic kids in the 1970s, and then it follows them throughout their lives. And I love books that kind of have that. And I try to do it in the lounge, right? Because by reading the lounge, faculty lounge, you will kind of get this broad overview of characters going back to the 60s and stuff. I love that feeling when you finish a book where you feel like you've explored a whole universe,
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, and I always like to share with my listeners and watchers, whatever, kind of what I'm enjoying right now too. So I was telling someone the other day, I feel like I sometimes have a little bit of ADHD where I will get hyper fixated on something for a little while, and I dive in 100%. And right now I'm on a bit of a country kick, and as if you'd have told high school me that I'd be into country music in any way, I would have fought you. But specifically, the book that I'm reading right now, during the summer, I'm working at my local public library.
Mm-hmm.
And so the book that I'm reading right now is this book, which is Dolly Parton, Song Teller
Oh, cool.
And this is like a giant coffee table book, but it's really cool. It's got a lot of great pictures of her, but it's also got like the lyrics to some of her songs and her kind of explaining like where they came from and what was going on at the time that those songs came out. And so I feel like if there's a human being that's alive right now that deserves, the title saint, Dolly might be that
Yeah,
person.
she just might be it. I just love her. Yeah, she's incredible. Absolutely. Oh, that sounds like a fun book.
It's super fun. And then I'm pairing that. I just got this in the mail today too, so I'll share about this very quickly. This vinyl record this is an album called Petty Country. Welcome to Petty Country. And this is country artists covering Tom Petty's music.
Oh, fun.
And so this has like Chris Stapleton, Thomas Rhett, Luke Combs, Dolly Parton, Willie Nelson and his son are on here. A lot of great covers. Dierks Bentley is the lead single. Really great album. And so I'm on my country kick right now, and I'm really enjoying it.
My husband is a huge country fan, really old school country. And if you look like outlaw country, you listen to some early Hank Williams. I mean, there's a punk rock vibe to some of that stuff.
For sure. Absolutely.
And then I don't know if you know this, but Hank Williams' grandson, Hank III, who I have seen him live a couple of times. I don't know if he still tours. It's been a while, but he used to do 2 sets. He would do covers of his grandfather's songs, and he looks and sounds just like him. So it's very eerie. And then there's like a break, and then he comes out and he does like a hardcore set, and it's just really jarring. You're like, what is this? So there's some country punk overlap there.
Yeah. And I think, going back to the idea of like how we have so much more in common, I do feel like there's tons of that country that's very punk rock. I don't think anybody would argue that Johnny Cash, Cocaine Blues is like a punk rock song.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I think some of the hip hop music that my son loves, I feel some of those punk rock vibes in that too. So
yeah, absolutely. Good music is good music.
So Jennifer, as we're wrapping up real quick, the last thing I want to ask you, can you tell people where to reach you? And then also, will you talk a little bit about your upcoming book event? Because this will be out before your event at Blue Willow.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'm going to have a launch for the Faculty Lounge at the Blue Willow Bookshop here in Houston, which is in the Memorial area. And that is this Saturday, the 20th at 5 p.m. You can come buy a book. I'll sign it, but you do not have to buy a book. If you just want to come and say hi and, support your local library and get your book that way, that's great too. You do not have to come and buy a book to be there. The best way to find me, I have an author website, jennifermathieu.com, Mathieu. I'm really not on Twitter all that much. I do have a presence on Twitter at Jen Mathieu, and then I have a Facebook author page. The place where I'm normally at the most is Instagram, and that is at author Jen Mathieu. And you can find me there. And so, yeah, I definitely think if I were not an author, I would probably be totally absent on social media. I would love to be at that point, but I know at this, in the world we live in, this is a way to get stuff out to folks. So you can find me there, and I look forward to connecting with my readers.
And if I'm being fair, that's how I was able to connect with you, was through social media, which was a real gift.
So I'm glad it exists. There are times where I'm like, oh, if I were not an author, I think I would my husband's not on any social media, and I really envy him sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it can be a lot. And I do want to say, for those of you who do not live in the area, if you see this tomorrow, because I'm putting this out, on YouTube tomorrow, which is Thursday, the 18th, you can order books online from Blue Willow, and they will get them autographed to you. Yes. And so I've ordered my book from Blue Willow because I wanted to make sure that I supported an independent bookstore, and I also wanted to get an autograph.
Yeah, if you order from Blue Willow, I will be able to sign it, and they will ship it to you. So even if you live, you don't live in Texas or you don't live in Houston, you can order Blue Willow Bookshop. If you just Google Blue Willow Bookshop, you'll Houston, you'll get to the page and the events page, and they have a link, and you'll click, and I'm happy to sign the book. In fact, I heard from the event coordinator there that it's okay, it'll be fine, because Penguin my publisher can ship. They've actually run out of books, which means that people are buying it, but they're going to get another shipment in time. So order away, and I will be happy to sign it before it gets sent out.
So awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to read The Faculty Lounge with my book club, and I can't wait to read whatever you put out after that.
Oh, Brian, thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.